In the early 13th century, Anatolia was divided between the Byzantine Empire and the Turks. In the wake of the Mongol invasion, many Turkish tribes migrated in the west. Among this newly established Turkish settlers was Osman the First, who formed a new principality under the Ottoman Dynasty. He would start a fast expansion campaign of his dominion, fighting the numerically superior Byzantine Empire and encountering them in the Battle Bapheus, which would become one of the first major battles of the new state. At the beginning of the 13th century, Anatolia was divided between two relatively powerful states, the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Anatolian Seljuks in the central plateau. Equilibrium between them was disrupted by the Mongol invasion and conquest of the Seljuks following the Battle of Kost-Dag in 1243 and the reconquest of Constantinople by the Byzantine Paleologos dynasty in 1261, which shifted Byzantine attention away from the Anatolian frontier. Mongol pressure pushed nomadic Turkish tribes to migrate westward into the now poorly defended Byzantine territory. For the next 2 centuries, Anatolian Beyliks were under the suzerainty of the Mongols, especially the Ilkhanate. All coins minted during this period in Anatolia show Ilkhanate rulers. From the 1260s onward, Anatolia increasingly began to slip from Byzantine control as Turkish Anatolian Beyliks were established both in formerly Byzantine lands and in the territory of the fragmenting Seljuk Sultanate. Political authority in Western Anatolia was thus extremely fragmented by the end of the 13th century, split between locally established rulers, tribal groups, holy figures, and warlords, with Byzantine and Seljuk authority ever present but rapidly weakening. The fragmentation of authority has led several historians to describe the political entities of 13th and 14th century Anatolia as taifas, or petty kings, a comparison with the history of late medieval Muslim Spain. The power of these groups was largely dependent upon their ability to attract military manpower. Western Anatolia was then a hotbed of raiding activity, with warriors switching allegiance at will to whichever chief seemed most able to provide them with opportunities for plunder and glory. The Ottoman dynasty is named after the first ruler of the Ottoman polity, Osman the First. According to later Ottoman tradition, he was descended from a Turkic tribe which migrated out of Central Asia in the wake of the Mongol conquests. As evidenced by coins minted during his reign, Osman's father was named Ertugrul, but beyond this, the details are too mythological to be taken for granted. The origin of the Ottoman dynasty isn't known for sure, but it is known that it was established by Turks from Central Asia who migrated to Anatolia and were under Mongol suzerainty. Likewise, nothing is known about how Osman first established his principality Beylik, as the sources, none of them contemporary, provide many different and conflicting origin stories. What is certain is that at some point in the late 13th century, Osman emerged as the leader of a small principality centered on the town of Sogut in the northwestern Anatolian region of Bithynia. The emergence of Osman as a leader is marked by him issuing coins in his name, unlike his predecessors in the last 2 centuries who issued coins in the name of the Ilkhanates. Osman's principality was initially supported by the tribal manpower of nomadic Turkish groups, whom he led in raids against the Byzantine territories of the region. This Ottoman tribe was based not on blood ties, but on political expedience. Thus, it was inclusive of all who wished to join, including people of Byzantine origin. Osman's early followers consisted both of Turkish tribal groups and Byzantine renegades, with many but not all converts to Islam. Osman extended the control of his principality by conquering Byzantine towns along the Sakarya River. By 1301, the Ottoman Turks were besieging Nicaea, the former imperial capital of the Byzantines, and harassing Prusa. The Turkish raids also threatened the port city of Nicomedia with famine, as Turkish warrior bands roamed the countryside and prohibited the collection of the harvest. In the spring of 1302, Emperor Michael IX launched a campaign which reached south to Magnesia. The Turks, awed by his large army, avoided battle. Michael sought to confront them, but was dissuaded by his generals. The Turks, encouraged, resumed their raids, virtually isolating him at Magnesia. His army dissolved without battle as the local troops left to defend their homes, and the Alans, too, left to rejoin their families in Thrace. Michael was forced to withdraw by the sea, followed by another wave of refugees. To counter the threat to Nicomedia, Michael's father, Andronikos II Palaiologos, sent a Byzantine force of some 2,000 men, half of whom were recently hired Alan mercenaries, under the Megas Heteriarchis George Mazalan, to cross over the Bosporus and relieve the city. At the plain of Bapheus, an unidentified site perhaps to the east of Nicomedia, but within sight of the city on July 27, 1302, the Byzantines met a Turkish army of some 5,000 light cavalry under Osman himself, composed of his own troops as well as allies from the Turkish tribes of Paphlagonia and the Meander River area. The Turkish cavalry charged the Byzantines, whose Alan contingent did not participate in the battle. The Turks broke the Byzantine line, forcing George Mazalan to withdraw into Nicomedia under the cover of the Alan force. Bapheus was the first major victory for the nascent Ottoman Beylik, and of major significance for its future expansion. The Byzantines effectively lost control of the countryside of Bithynia, withdrawing to their forts which, isolated, fell one by one. After this battle, the countryside of Bithynia was left practically defenseless, so Osman used this opportunity to conquer the castle of Koyunhiza and the coastal town of Gemlik. The Byzantine defeat also sparked an exodus of the Christian population from the area into the European parts of the empire, further altering the region's demographic balance. Coupled with the defeat at Magnesia, which allowed the Turks to reach and establish themselves on the coasts of the Aegean Sea, Bapheus thus heralded the final loss of Asia Minor for Byzantium. According to Halil and Alsik, the battle allowed the Ottomans to achieve the characteristics and qualities of a state. The Ottoman conquest of Bithynia was nonetheless gradual, and the last Byzantine outpost there, Nicomedia, fell only in 1337. After the victory, thousands of Ghazis who believed that the resistance of the Byzantine Empire had been broken came in hordes from the interior of Anatolia to Bithynia to raid for spoils. Byzantine historian George Pachymeres indicated that the news had reached the Ghazis in Paphlagonia and that the fame of Osman Ghazi had reached there. He writes that now the threats came up to the gates of Constantinople, and the Turks were wandering around freely in small groups on the other side of the straits. There is not a single day that passes without hearing that the enemy is attacking the fortresses on the coast and taking people prisoners or killing them, Pachymeres reports. The Ghaza Thesis was first formulated in the 1930s by Turkish historian Fuat Koprulu and Austrian historian Paul Wittig, partly in response to contemporary Orientalist historians who tried to marginalize the role of the Turks in Ottoman state formation. Koprulu formulated what was to become the nationalized view of early Ottoman history. According to Koprulj, the Ottoman polity was formed by Turkish tribes fleeing the advance of the Mongol Empire, built upon Turkish tribal manpower, and administered by men from the Anatolian hinterland experienced in the Turco-Muslim political tradition of the Seljuks. Paul Wittig, responding to Koprul's claims, accepted the Turco-Muslim basis of the early Ottoman state, agreeing that it grew out of the already highly developed civilization of Seljuk Anatolia and was fundamentally shaped by the unique conditions of the Byzantine frontier. Yet rather than Turkish ethnicity and tribal connections, he placed his primary emphasis upon the role of Islam. For Wittig, the Ottomans were first and foremost Islamic holy warriors. His primary evidence for this included the titles adopted by early Ottoman rulers, including an inscription erected in Bursa in 1337 describing Orhan, the second Ottoman ruler, as Ghazi, son of Ghazi. Wittig also relied upon the work of the early 15th century Ottoman poet Ahmedi, who likewise described the early Ottoman rulers as Ghazis. Thus, in this formulation, the early Ottoman polity was built upon an ideology of holy war and was able to grow powerful by attracting warriors to join in conquering the Christians of Anatolia and the Balkans. The early Ottomans harnessed the religious and martial energies of the frontier between the crumbling Byzantine and Seljuk states in order to conquer an empire. It was Whittek's formulation which became generally, though not unanimously, accepted among Western historians of the Ottoman Empire for much of the 20th century. In the century after the death of Osman, Ottoman rule had begun to extend over Anatolia and the Balkans. The earliest conflicts began during the ongoing Byzantine-Ottoman Wars, waged in Anatolia in the late 13th century before entering Europe in the mid-14th century, followed by the Bulgarian-Ottoman Wars and the Serbian-Ottoman Wars waged beginning in the mid-14th century. Much of this period was characterized by Ottoman expansion into the Balkans. Osman's son Orhan captured the northwestern Anatolian city of Bursa in 1326, making it the new capital of the Ottoman state and supplanting Byzantine control in the region.